Good day, everyone. Welcome once again to Education 502 Methods of Research. This lecture is intended primarily for my research students who are taking Master of Arts in Education or MAED and Doctor of Philosophy students at the Graduate School of Eastern Visayas State University. And please take note that I employed a blended modality in my class, combining face-to-face sessions with asynchronous sessions using Moodle as our learning management system. So the recorded version of this lecture will be uploaded to Moodle for future reference of my students. Again, of course, in research. And then for today's lecture, I'll be talking about the methodology chapter of a thesis or dissertation or research proposal as a whole. And then I'll be talking specifically about how to write the methodology part of a phenomenological research design. So before I dive right into writing the phenomenological or the methodology section of a phenomenological research design, we have to remember that there are two major types of research in terms of method. We have qualitative and quantitative research method. And we know very well that under quantitative research method, there are four famous designs under it. We have the descriptive research design, correlational research design, experimental research design, and quasi-experimental research design. And within the quantitative research method itself, there are these four types of designs have its own unique and distinct way of writing the data gathering procedure part. So the protocol differs between these four types of designs under quantitative research design. On the other hand, we have qualitative research method. Under it, we have several famous research designs. We have historical research design, grounded theory design, narrative research design, case study design, phenomenological research design. And again, just as the designs in quantitative research method, each design has its own unique feature and distinct way of writing the data gathering procedure. So, we need to master the basics in writing the protocol of its research design. So for today's lecture, again, I'll be talking about the specificity of the phenomenological research design under qualitative research method. And if you are interested to know about how we write the methodology of a case study design or a narrative design or an ethnographic research design, please refer to the um, description box below for the link of this video lectures. I'll be recording a lecture on those designs. So let's proceed to, again, writing the methodology chapter of a phenomenological research design. Wait, okay. So let's talk about the parts of a methodology. And please take note that although each design differs in terms of its unique feature and manner of writing, especially the data gathering procedure part, but we have to remember that the methodology part or chapter of a thesis or dissertation has more or less the same contents, the standard contents of a methodology part. So um, in this lecture, I'll be using the introduction as again standard content of the methodology part, the introduction, and then we have the design and instrument section, the locale and participants, data gathering procedure, data analysis, and ethical consideration. So again, whether you are using quanti or quali, the methodology part contains this, standard components. But please take note as well that, or we have to remember that there is no one size fits all format or standard in developing or in preparing the methodology part or chapter of your thesis or dissertation. My point is some format you simply design after the introduction, they have design and another section for instrument, and then other formats separate research locale and participants and whatnot, and so on and so forth. So again, it depends on the guidelines of the journal or the guidelines of the university, but the important thing to remember is the methodology chapter contains more or less this standard, uh, content. So in my case, instead of separating in this lecture, specifically in this lecture, and in my style of doing qualitative research, specifically qualitative research, I do not separate design and instrument, locale and participants. I combine them. Okay. So, in what follows, I'll be talking very briefly about what an introduction is, what is the nature and dynamics of the introduction of the methodology, and then I'll proceed to how to write the design and instrument section, locale and participants, and all the components, standard components of a methodology. So, before I go to discussing the key concepts or the techniques and steps in writing each section of the methodology chapter, let me very briefly define or talk about its nature and dynamics. So for the introduction of the methodology part, you need to describe the systematic procedures used to explore and interpret the lived experiences of participants using the phenomenological research design. So again, this video lecture is all about the phenomenological research design. That is why I'm talking about, lived experiences of the participants. And then for the design and instrument section, here we need to explain the chosen research design and detail the instruments used for data collection. And then we need to ensure that they are appropriate, reliable, and aligned with the study's objectives and research questions. So that's what a design and instrument contains. And then for the locale and participants, we need to describe the geographical setting of the study and then provide a clear accounts of the participant selection, including the inclusion criteria and demographic details to establish the context and relevance of the research. And then we have the data gathering procedure that outlines the step-by-step process of how data will be collected. The data analysis part explains the methods and procedures used to organize, interpret, and draw meaning from the collected data. And then we have the ethical consideration part, which demonstrates how the ethical principles will be upheld throughout the research process. So again, these are the standard components of a methodology section or chapter of your thesis or dissertation proposal, or thesis and dissertation as a whole. And in what follows, I'll discuss very briefly the steps on how to write these sections of your methodology chapter, and I'll provide some examples, concrete examples to it. So let's start with how to write the introduction of the methodology part. So this is very important because as I observe when reviewing journals for publication, manuscripts for publications, and sitting in thesis and dissertation defenses, I noticed that some scholars, or many, especially young scholars, fledgling scholars, miss to write properly the introductory part of the methodology. And then to the point that they just go directly to the design, without giving us an overview, giving readers an overview of what they need to do or what they will be doing in that chapter. And please take note that this is very important. Writing the introduction part properly is very important, because if you write it properly, if you have a clear introductory part that really gives an overview of what you will be doing in this chapter, this sends a signal to your readers, to your reviewers. If you're writing a journal, a paper for publication, or your panel in thesis and dissertation defenses, you're sending a signal to them that you are an expert of what you're doing, or maybe you have mastered the basics in research. So with that, so when you have that idea, or when the panel or your reviewer um appreciates or is impressed by how you write your introduction, again, they will have some kind of a bias towards you, a positive one, that indeed this researcher is knowing what he is doing. So even if that's introduction, we need to do it well. Let me give you a concrete example of an introduction of a methodology chapter. And as you can see here, this is chapter 2, and then the title is methodology. And we're used to having chapter 3 for the methodology part, but since I'm doing qualitative research and I incorporate the literature review parts chapter in chapter 1, in the rationale of the in the background of the study, in the introductory part. So chapter 2 now becomes my methodology now becomes my chapter 2. So this is an example of how I frame the introduction of my methodology, and then just some techniques on steps on how to write this section, on what or what to include in the introductory part or section of your methodology. First is you need to briefly rehash what the study aims to do. So in this case, for example, the first sentence again, briefly rehashes what my study aims to do. And it reads, this chapter presents the methodology employed to explore the lived experiences of first-generation college students navigating academic life in a university setting. And then after rehashing the research goal, then we need to clearly state what type of method and design will you employ, and then briefly explain why. For example, in the second sentence, the second sentence reads, a qualitative phenomenological research design was chosen to capture the personal meanings and interpretations of participants' experiences. Okay? And then after that, you need to provide a brief rationale for choosing this design and how it aligns with your research questions. So sentence number 3 illustrates this point. It reads, this approach is appropriate as it seeks to understand how individuals perceive and make sense of their educational journeys. The study focuses on uncovering common themes and essence through in-depth interviews. And then we need to set the stage for the subsequent sections by outlining the chapter's focus on data collection and analysis procedure. For example, the last sentence reads, this chapter details the research design, participant selection, data collection methods, ethical considerations, and the procedures used for analyzing and interpreting qualitative data. So as you can see, if you read the methodology, this sample, it gives readers, your reviewers, your panel, a clear overview of what you will be doing in this chapter. Okay? So that's how we write prepare or write the introductory part of a methodology section. Let me proceed to writing the design and the instrument. So some guides, some techniques on how to write the methodology. Wait, it's not moving. Anyway, okay. So how do we write the design part of section of your methodology? So begin by stating that your study employs a qualitative method with phenomenology as research design. And then briefly explain what a phenomenological research design is and what it aims to do. And then explain briefly why phenomenology is the most appropriate design for your study. So in the introductory part, you give your readers an idea of the design that you will use, but it is in the design section that you explain it in full, in details. So for example, you may write the design section this way, okay? And let me read this one. The study will employ a qualitative research method with phenomenology as research design. Phenomenological research design or phenomenological research is a qualitative approach that seeks to explore and describe individuals' lived experiences to reveal the meanings and essence of a particular phenomenon as perceived by the participants themselves. And after that sentence, I cite Bujotti, or I put a source to that definition, because in the first place, we don't invent the definition of a phenomenological research design. So I just borrowed Bujotti, and so therefore I cited him in this work. And just a side discussion on citations. Aside from the fact that we need to read a lot of literature in research. And so, since this is a research work, we need to have a lot of citations. So, we need to include a lot of citations. We need to remember as well that citations are very important in research, because after making a huge claim or making an argument, we are not yet an authority to, and since we are not yet in the authority to make that claim, then we need to cite literature. We need to cite famous scholars who are in the authority, considered authority in that field, to support our claim. So this is that's also the reason why I cited Bujotti in this sentence, because aside from the fact that I borrowed his idea about phenomenological research design, I also would like to support Bujotti in my own framing of the statement. Okay. And then you have it there, see also Tavakol and Sanders 2025. Please take note that Bujotti's understanding of a phenomenological research design is almost exactly the same with that of Tavakol and Sanders, and so it greatly helps if we also add Tavakol and Sanders in that definition. Okay, then let me proceed. The researcher considers this design most appropriate for the present study as it allows for an in-depth exploration and understanding of the lived experiences of the out-of-field math teachers in Leyte National High School, thereby capturing the meanings and essence of their professional realities. As by the way, in this lecture, I will be in the discussion that follows, I'll be making use of the lived experiences of the out of field math teachers in Leyte National High School. Okay, so that would be my examples here. And then, as Bugliotti notes, such experiences provide valuable insights into the said teacher's professional challenges and personal interpretations of teaching mathematics beyond their area of specialization. Okay. And for you might ask why we need to determine the lived experiences of out of field math teachers in Leyte National High School. In other words, if you ask the reason why, the rationale behind the study, please refer to my discussion on how to formulate research problem or how to identify a gap in research, because it is in that lecture that I explain in full the importance of problem formulation and gap spotting. So in this lecture, I'll just focus specifically on writing the methodology part. Okay, so that's how we write the design section of the methodology of a phenomenological research design. Now let me proceed to instrument and how we write this part as well. So here, first we need to identify the main data gathering instrument, and then we have to take note that in phenomenological research design, the researcher is the primary instrument of data collection, and not just in phenomenological research design, in qualitative research as a whole. It is always, most of the time, it is the researcher who is the primary instrument of data collection. This is because data are gathered through interaction, reflection, and interpretation. So in qualitative research, In qualitative research, we go to the field, talk to the participants, interview them, make observations, conduct focus group discussions. So there's interaction with our participants, and we make interpretations out of those data gathered. So again, the researcher is the primary instrument of data collection. Unlike in quantitative research, the primary instruments are questionnaire, tests, and survey. We need to remember that normally there are no interviews in quantitative research, because the main goal of quantitative research is to measure the relationship between and among variables in the study. And data from interviews cannot be measured. But many quantitative researchers added interviews in the study for triangulation purposes to amplify the arguments. But the interview is not necessary in their data collection. Okay? Because again, the primary instrument of data collection in quantitative research are questionnaires, tests, survey, and whatnot. So going back to qualitative research and phenomenological research design, the researcher again is the primary instrument. But of course, we have secondary supporting instruments. So next is you describe the supporting instruments. Here, aside from the researcher, you describe the data gathering tools used to facilitate the process, such as semi-structured or in-depth interview guides, audio recorders, and field notes. And then explain instrument validation. By the way, we don't have instrument validation in qualitative research the way it is understood in quantitative research. Like you have to have the standardized questionnaire. The standardized questionnaire should undergo, let's say, dry running, pilot testing, and whatnot until it becomes again standardized. That's how they determine validity of the instrument in quantitative research. In qualitative research, we normally use credibility and trustworthiness. So we don't have reliability and reliability. So we don't use the word validity in qualitative research the way it is understood in quanti. But still, since reviewers and panel members always ask for validity of the instrument, then we use that one here in qualitative research. Anyway, although take note that although phenomenological research is qualitative, ensuring credibility and trustworthiness of your instrument is essential. So here you mention how you validated your interview guide, for example, through expert review or pilot testing. Also, you briefly describe what themes or dimensions the questions focused on. Okay. This is an example of an instrument section of a phenomenological research design based on my own, research. So it reads, in this study, the researcher will serve as the primary instrument for data collection, such as the researcher's role involved engaging participants in open dialogue, facilitating interviews, and interpreting their accounts while practicing reflexivity and bracketing to minimize bias. The primary instrument, the researcher. Then let me continue. The secondary instrument for data collection is a semi-structured interview guide developed by the researcher. The guide will contain open-ended questions designed to elicit rich detailed narratives about the participants' experiences. Follow-up questions will be asked to clarify meanings and probe deeper into the essence of their lived experiences. Audio recorder will be used, which with participants' consent, to ensure accuracy of responses during transcription. Field notes will also be taken to document nonverbal cues, emotional expressions, and the researcher's reflective observations during interviews. Please take note that I use will be, because I'm writing this section from the vantage point of a research proposal. And then to continue, to ensure the validity and appropriateness of the interview guide, it will be reviewed by three experts in qualitative research and education. Now, please take note that in qualitative research, in or please take note that in validating or establishing the reliability of our questionnaire, at least in qualitative research, a review from an expert, at least one, your advisor, for example, or to be safe, three experts in the field is enough again to ensure the validity and appropriateness of our instrument. So that's enough. Unlike in quantitative research again, that you have to undergo try running and pilot testing and you have to repeat it over and over again until the question is standardized. Let me continue. Revisions will be made based on their suggestions to improve clarity and relevance. And then the interview guide will include questions that explore first, participants' personal experiences in teaching subjects not in line with their field of specialization, out of field. Second, their emotions and perceptions during the experience. And third, the meanings they ascribe to those experiences. Okay, so that's how we write the instrument section of the methodology chapter of a phenomenological research study or design. Now, if we combine the design and instrument that I just mentioned, this is how it reads or how it looks like. So I don't need to read the entire design and section. You can just screenshot this if you want, or if you want a copy of this, you can refer to the link below for the transcription of this video lecture. Okay, so let me proceed now to the next section of this chapter, which is research locale and participants. Let me talk about the research locale first. In preparing the research locale, it's a good idea to start with a general introduction of the setting, and in the case of the above example, the out-of-field math teachers, by briefly introducing Leyte National High School, including its location, background, and context as a learning institution. Wait. And then explain why this school is appropriate for your study. For example, it has a number of out-of-field teachers assigned to teach mathematics. Describe the context relevant to your study, which includes the school's type, public secondary school, for example, number of teachers or departments, particularly in mathematics, and the presence of teachers handling subjects outside their field of specialization. Emphasize as well how this context help explore the lived experiences of out-of-field math teachers. Just to reiterate again, I am writing the methodology chapter of this study, lived experiences of out-of-field math teachers in Leyte National High School. So if you want to know why the need for this study, the rationale of the study, why the problem is a researchable one, then please refer to my discussion on problem formulation or gap spotting. The link is provided in the description box below. And then justify the choice of locale by explaining why this particular setting is chosen. For instance, accessibility and familiarity of the researcher with the environment, existence of out-of-field teachers who can provide meaningful data, and relevance of the site to the research purpose. And this is an example of a research locale section in the study. It reads, this study will be conducted at Leyte National High School, a public secondary school located in Tacloban City, Leyte. Established in 1903, the school serves as a large population of junior and senior high school students and employs teachers from various subject areas. In recent years, The school has assigned several teachers to teach mathematics despite their specialization in other fields due to staffing shortages. So as you can see, this school asks teachers who are graduates, for example, in English or science, to teach mathematics. So you can only imagine how difficult it is for those teachers to teach that difficult subject that is, in the first place, not in line with their field of specialization. Let me continue. This context provides a suitable environment to explore the lived experiences of out-of-field math teachers who handle subjects not in line with their field of specialization. The researcher chooses this locale because of its accessibility and the presence of qualified participants who can provide rich and descriptive accounts of their experiences. So just one paragraph for the research locale, but this provides your readers, your panel, a clear idea of where you will be conducting the study and why you conduct the study in that locale. Okay, so, and then let me proceed to the participant section. In writing this section, we start with identifying who your participants are. And in the case of the above example, again, lived experiences of out-of-field math teachers in Leyte National High School includes clearly stating that the participants are out-of-field teachers assigned to teach mathematics at Leyte National High School. And then after that, please take note that you need to define out of field because this is a nuanced term, so that non-specialists in the field cannot easily understand this concept. So briefly define what out of field means, in this case. And then state the number of participants, which is normally between 10 and 25. And please take notes that in qualitative research, whether you're employing historical research design, ethnographic research design, philosophical research, or phenomenological research design, grounded theory, and whatnot, the number of participants is normally between 10 and 25. And we could have saturation points in the 11th or 12th or 13th, okay? But in phenomenological research design, sometimes 6 to 8 is enough. Yeah. This is because, again, state the number of participants, which is normally between 10 and 25. Sometimes 6 to 8 participants are enough to allow in-depth exploration of experiences, especially in phenomenological research design, wherein we dig deeper into the experiences of the participants. We interview them one by one-on-one interview, and then, dig deeper into their experiences about a particular phenomenon. So 6 to 8 is enough for that. And just very briefly on the idea of, and then mention that the final number of participants depends on data saturation. So when we say data saturation, there are no new insights that emerge from the interview. So for example, in the 10th participants, 11th and 12th, the answers to your questions are almost the same, so that there are no new insights or answers that emerge in the interview. So that's a perfect time for you to declare that indeed data saturation has been reached, that there are no new insights gathered from the interview from the participants. And so if data saturation is reached in the 10th or 11th or 12th or 15th participant, then you stop the interview because it's useless to proceed to the 25th, to the 20th, to the 25th, because again, there are no new insights gathered from the interview. Okay? So, but when preparing the research proposal, before you start data gathering, you target 25, because just in case you cannot reach the saturation point in the 15th or in the 12th or in the 14th, you proceed to the 25th participants. But my suggestions, or this is a common suggestions among scholars, especially qualitative researchers, is that if you have enough time and resources and energy, it's always a good idea to interview all the 25 participants. But then again, in the scope and delimitation, if you don't have enough resources and if you don't have enough time, then you stop normally, ideally, in the saturation points. And then explain the inclusion and exclusion criteria. For example, inclusion, teachers currently teaching mathematics but with different specialization. Again, out of field math teachers. So, like a math, like a BS Ed major in English teaching math, or a BS Ed major in science teaching mathematics. So that's your inclusion criteria. One of your inclusion criteria, of course. And then for exclusion criteria, teachers with formal mathematics training or those newly hired with less than 1 year of experience. Okay, so um, um, obviously the study is all about the lived experiences, the difficulties and challenges that out of field math teachers encounter on a daily basis in teaching again the subject not in line with their field of specialization. So obviously we exclude teachers who have formal training in trainings in mathematics, or teachers who graduated with mathematics as their majors, because if you include them, that defeats the purpose of determining the difficulties of out of field math teachers. So we exclude that um, in the participants. And of course, again, those newly hired with less than 1 year of experience. So we cannot talk about the rich experiences of our participants if they were hired less than a year. Yeah. And then describe the sampling method. For example, purposive sampling will be used. It's a very common method in phenomenological research design. Okay, a method common in phenomenological studies to select participants who have directly experienced the phenomenon. But you can, after using purposive sampling, of course, you can combine that with convenient sampling or snowball sampling. Depends on the situation. And this is an example um, of a research participant section. And I read, the participants of this study will be out-of-field teachers assigned to teach mathematics at Lady National High School. And then I define out-of-field teachers. Out-of-field teachers refer to educators who handle subjects not aligned with their professional or academic specialization. Then as you can see, I cited hubs because again, I did not invent the definition of the out-of-field teachers. So I borrowed the idea of hubs for a while. And then let me continue. Using purposive sampling, the researcher will select 6 to 8 participants who have been teaching mathematics for at least 1 school year, despite having a non-mathematics background. This small number is deemed appropriate for a phenomenological study to allow in-depth exploration of participants' lived experiences. And this is a huge claim. And again, I did not invent this idea, but I have the idea that, of course, a phenomenological study is appropriate in this case. So I borrow again, or I cited Bernard to support my claim. And since again, Morse's idea is of kindred spirit or is almost the same with that of Bernard, and so I also cited Morse to show again that I'm doing research and that the argument of this scholars support my statements or my own arguments. And then lastly, participation was voluntary, will be voluntary rather, and informed consent will be secured prior to the interviews. And then all data gathered will be treated with strict confidentiality. So that's a concrete example of a research participant section. And then if we combine the locale and participants that I just mentioned, I just provided above, then this is how the research and locale participants would look like. Okay, so I don't need to read wait, it's not working. I need not read the entire research and local participant section. And then we proceed to data gathering procedure. Let me start with preparation, permission, and participant recruitment process. In preparing the data gathering procedure, it is wise to begin with preparation and permission, which includes stating that you first seek permission to conduct the study at Leyte National High School, mentioning that you will submit a formal letter of request to the school's division superintendent and principal or head or school head, along with the research proposal and ethics clearance, if applicable, as well as the participants. Also indicate that approval was obtained before proceeding to data collection. I wish to dwell a bit on this because this is very important, and I noticed that many scholars miss this part. First and foremost, again, sometimes I notice that research proposals or even published research that involves data gathering, that involves fieldwork, miss to include a data gathering procedure. Again, a data gathering procedure is a standard component of a methodology part or chapter. So we should not miss this part. And then second point that I would like to highlight at this point in this section of the methodology is that especially when doing education research in the Philippines, some scholars who are not guided by the advisor or who have not mastered the basics in data gathering procedure, they just go directly to the school and interview participants or distribute the questionnaire without asking permission from the higher ups. And they thought that and they thought that they could just do that anytime they want to do it because maybe they are in a hurry and then yeah. But we should avoid that one because before we go to the field and conduct the actual gathering of our data, we need permission from the higher ups and the consent of the participants themselves. Okay, so this is to address the ethical aspects of our research. So what we need to do first is, in the case of education research in the Philippines, and if our participants, for example, are out of field math teachers in Leyte National High School, we need to ask permission first from the school's division superintendent. So we will write a letter to the school's division superintendents, and in that letter, uh, uh, I'll record another lecture on how to prepare a permission letter because that's a nuanced discussion as well. So we need to ask permission by writing a letter of request to the SDS. And please take note that once we have the permission from the school's division superintendent, the next thing to do is to write again to the principal or the school head. Because in the Philippines, we have this hierarchy, in the region, we have, or in the division, we have the school's division superintendent and then principal and school head and then the teachers themselves. And in conducting research fieldwork in the schools, we need to start with the SDS. But there is this misconception that once we have secured permission from the SDS, then researchers go to the school and gather the data. That's not enough. So again, once we have the permission from the SDS, we need to write again to the principal or the school head, asking permission that you will conduct study in their school. And then there are rules to follow in writing the request letter, of course. Now, when you write to the principal, you need to attach the approval of the SDS. Okay, so when I write to the principal or the school head of Lady National High School, I need to attach my letter request, the approved letter, to the SDS, and I will also attach my research proposal. So with these documents, you go to the principal, give the letter, and leave it there, and then we can go back the following day or after a week, and then seek again. The intention is to seek permission from the principal. And if we have the permission from the principal, we need to write another letter specifically intended to our participants, the teachers, the out of field math teachers themselves. Okay, and then we secure their consent. And only when all the permissions have been obtained that we can start conducting the actual data gathering by interviewing the out of field math teachers in that school. So we need to take note of that because I think, not I think, that's the very first step. If you secure, for example, ethical clearance, if you secure an ethics clearance from a university research ethics committee, that's the first part of the protocol. The data gathering procedure, you explain how you will gather the data, of course. Okay. And after that, you describe the participant recruitment process, which includes explaining how participants will be identified using purposive sampling based on a specific criteria. For example, non-math majors teaching math, indicating that the researcher will personally contact the qualified teachers and invite them to participate. Again, after securing permission from the SDS and the principal or school head. And then mentioning of informed consent, that participants will be oriented about the purpose, process, and ethical safeguards. This is an example of the preparation, permission, and recruitment participant recruitment process. It reads, before conducting the study, the researcher will seek formal permission from the school's division superintendents of the Department of Education in Leyte, as well as the principal of Leyte National High School to gather data from selected out-of-field mathematics teachers. A written request along with the approved research proposal will be submitted for review and approval. Upon receiving authorization, the researcher will coordinate with the identified teachers, explain the purpose and procedure of the study, and secure their voluntary participation and sign informed consent prior to the start of data collection. You see, this is just a very brief idea of the preparation, permission, and participant recruitment process. But if it is read by your readers, by your reviewers, by panel members, it sends a clear signal to us that indeed the researcher will be conducting the actual data gathering in an ethical manner. And then let me proceed to how data will be collected. These are the steps, guides in doing it. Say that first, you say that in phenomenological research design or in say that in phenomenological research, in-depth interviews are the primary data collection. And then specify the type of interview that you will use. For example, semi-structured or unstructured, and note that it will allow participants to describe their experiences freely. And then mention that interviews will be audio recorded, with permission, of course, and supplemented by field notes. Then explain the duration and venue. For example, interviews will be conducted face-to-face in a quiet area within the school campus that will last 45 to 60 minutes each. Then explain how data saturation will be determined, like stating that interviews will continue until data saturation, that is, no new themes or insights emerged. Then describe ethical considerations, which includes emphasizing confidentiality, anonymity, and voluntary participation, mentioning the use of pseudonyms or codes in transcripts, and noting that participants will withdraw at any point without consequence. And then end with data organization and preparation for analysis, which includes briefly describing how interviews will be transcribed verbatim and reviewed for accuracy, as well as mentioning that the transcript will then be subjected to thematic analysis or phenomenological reduction. This is an example of how data will be collected. And let me read. In phenomenological research, in-depth interviews in-depth interviews serve as the primary method of data collection. And then Gadget 2022, I cited again the source. This study will utilize semi-structured interviews to allow participants to describe freely their lived experiences as out-of-field mathematics teachers. With their permission, each interview will be audio recorded and supplemented by field notes. to capture nonverbal cues and contextual details. The face-to-face interviews will be conducted in a quiet area within the school campus and will last approximately 45 to 60 minutes. Interviews will continue until data saturation is reached, meaning no new themes or insights emerge. Ethical considerations will be strictly observed, ensuring confidentiality, anonymity, and voluntary participation. Pseudonyms or codes will be used to protect participants' identities, and they may withdraw at any time without consequence. All interviews will be translated verbatim, reviewed for accuracy, and organized for thematic analysis or phenomenological reduction to uncover the essence of participants' lived experiences. So that's how, again, how we write the data collection section. And then data gathering procedure. If we combine the two, of course, this is how it would look like. Okay, so I don't need to read this again. I have already explained that. I have already read this part. I'm just showing you how the data gathering procedure would look like very briefly. And then let me proceed to data analysis. First, begin with an overview of phenomenological data analysis, which includes explaining that data analysis in phenomenology involves organizing, interpreting, and describing participants' lived experiences to identify their essence or meaning, mentioning that you will follow a recognized approach such as Colaitis or Mostaka's or George's phenomenological method, and briefly explain that this process involves systematically coding and clustering significant statements into themes that capture the shared experiences of participants. And then describe the process of organizing and familiarizing with the data, which includes explaining that you will transcribe all interviews verbatim and read them repeatedly to gain a deep understanding of the participants' narratives. So it is here where you immerse yourself thoroughly in the data, in the transcribed interviews, and of course field notes. Yeah. As well as mentioning that you will bracket or set aside personal biases, epoche, according to Husserl, Edmund Husserl, the founder of phenomenology, to ensure that interpretations reflect participants' actual meanings, not our assumptions. So descriptive phenomenology, we let the reality speak for itself. And then explain how significant statements will be identified, which includes stating that you will extract significant statements directly related to the research question. For example, challenges, coping mechanisms, emotions, meaning making, out of field teaching, as well as articulating that these statements will form the basis for further analysis. Then let me continue. Discuss the developments of meaning Discuss the development of meaning units and themes, which includes explaining that you will formulate meanings from significant statements, then cluster similar meanings into themes or categories that represent patterns across participants, as well as stating that themes may include, for example, teaching beyond specialization, coping with content gaps, or developing confidence over time. So in the data analysis, I'll make another lecture on data analysis, especially in phenomenological reduction, wherein we use Colaitis method of Colaitis approach. And then describe how you will construct and validate the textual and structural descriptions of the transcribed interview, of course, of your data, which includes explaining that you will create a textual description, what participants experience. This is what we meant exactly by textual description, okay? And structural description, how they experience it, the context, conditions, emotions. That is why during the interview, somebody must take note of the nonverbal cues and other facial and emotional expression of the participants, because that would provide again the structural description. as well as indicate that you will integrate both into a composite description representing the collective lived experience of out-of-field math teachers. And then address validation and trustworthiness, which includes stating that you will conduct member checking, where participants review the interpretations to confirm accuracy, as well as mentioning the use of peer debriefing or audit trails to ensure credibility and dependability. And lastly, conclude with a brief statements on presentation. Here, you will end the section by stating that the analyzed data will be presented in a narrative form, supported by direct quotations from participants to illustrate each theme. I will also have I will also prepare or come up with a lecture on when to use quotation marks, because that's one of the questions of the viewers in my YouTube channel, in these lectures, in my lectures, in my video lectures. So this is an example of a data analysis section. And it reads, wait, it reads, okay. Data analysis in phenomenological research involves organizing, interpreting, and describing participants' lived experiences to uncover their essence and meaning. This study will employ Colaichi's approach. Colaichi's phenomenological method, which systematically involves identifying, coding, and clustering significant statements into themes that capture the shared experiences of the participants. And please take note that in some formats or model, we explain very briefly each step in Colaichi's or in a specific data analysis method, the steps, very briefly explaining them. But in many cases, simply talking about the steps is enough. Like in this case, which reads, systematically involves identifying, coding, and clustering significant statements into themes that capture the shared experiences of the participants. That's enough. But if your panel member in your thesis defense or the reviewer of a journal will ask you to provide the details of this process, then do it. There's no harm in doing that, of course. All interview recordings will be transcribed verbatim and read repeatedly to achieve familiarity and deep understanding of each participant's narrative. So this is the immersion part. We immerse, as researchers, we immerse ourselves in the transcribed data, the transcribed interviews in the data itself. We familiarize ourselves. We immerse in the data itself. Throughout the process, Throughout the process, the researcher will engage in bracketing. Again, Edmund Husserl calls it epoche, to set aside personal assumptions and remain faithful to the participant's meaning or meanings. Significant statements directly related to the research questions, such as challenges, coping mechanisms, emotions, and meaning making in out-of-field math teaching, will be extracted for analysis. So you focus on those things. This will then be formulated into meanings and clustered into themes like teaching beyond specialization, coping with content gaps, and developing confidence over time. Yeah. From these themes, textual descriptions, what was experienced, and structural descriptions, how it was experienced, will be developed and synthesized into a composite description that represents the collective essence of the participants' lived experiences. To ensure trustworthiness, member checking, peer debriefing, and audit trails will be employed. The analyzed data will be presented narratively, supported by direct quotations from participants to illustrate each emergent theme. So this is an example of a data analysis section. Let me now proceed to the last part, which is ethical consideration. And in doing this, first, oh, sorry. In doing this, first, we begin with a statement of ethical compliance, which includes stating that your study will adhere to ethical standards set by your university. In this case, the Department of Education, for example, and relevant research ethics committees, as well as mentioning that the researcher will secure ethical clearance or approval before data collection. And then explain how permission will be obtained, which includes stating that a formal letter of request will be sent to the principal of Leyte National High School seeking permission to conduct the study, as well as mentioning that approval will be obtained before contacting potential participants. And then discuss informed consent, which includes explaining that participants will be given informed consent form and clearly outlines the purpose, procedures, expected duration, benefits, and possible risk of the study, as well as mentioning that participation will be voluntary and participants may withdraw at any time without penalty. For a sample of an informed consent, I will make a brief video lecture of that again. So you may subscribe if you, so that you will be notified when I upload that that lecture. And then address the confidentiality and anonymity section, of course, which includes stating that all personal information will be kept strictly confidential, explaining that pseudonyms or codes will replace real names in all transcripts and reports. And note that data will be securely stored in password protected files or locked folders accessible only to the researcher. And then mention respect and protection of participants' welfare, which includes acknowledging that participants' emotional comfort will be prioritized, given the reflective nature of phenomenological interviews, as well as mentioning that the researcher will ensure a respectful and non-judgmental atmosphere during interviews. And then explain how data will be used and disposed, which includes clarifying that the data or the collected data will be used solely for academic purposes, as well as mentioning that after the study is completed, data will be safely stored or destroyed according to ethical standards. And then lastly, conclude with a commitment to ethical integrity. Here, end the section by reaffirming the researcher's commitment to uphold honesty, transparency, and respect for human participants throughout the research process. And this is an example of an ethical consideration section. Let me read this one. This is going to be the last slide. It reads, this study will strictly adhere to the ethical research standards of the university, the Department of Education, and relevant research ethics committees. Ethical clearance or approval will be obtained. Ethical clearance or approval. Sometimes you need not, process ethical clearance, or if it's not required, approval is enough. Okay, that is why we say ethical clearance or approval will be obtained prior to data collection. A formal letter of request will be sent to the school's division superintendent of Leyte and to the principal of Leyte National High School to seek permission to conduct the study. And approval will be secured before contacting potential participants. Each participant will receive an informed consent form detailing the study's purpose, procedures, duration, benefits, and possible risks. Participation will be voluntary with the option to withdraw at any time without consequence. Confidentiality and anonymity will be maintained by using pseudonyms or codes, with data stored securely in password-protected files accessible only to the researcher. Participants' emotional comfort will be prioritized through respectful and non-judgmental interactions. All data will be used solely for academic purposes and disposed of properly after completion. And then the researcher commits to honesty, transparency, and respect throughout the study. And so that's how we write the methodology chapter or section of a phenomenological research design. I hope it helps. And if you have questions, you may type that in the comment section, and I'll try my best to respond to them. That's all for now, and I wish you all the best. And again, may this lecture guide in writing your proposal or your thesis as a whole, specifically the methodology part, and specifically if you are employing a phenomenological research design in your study. So again, for the method for the lectures on how to write the methodology section or chapter of a case study design or a narrative research design or ethnographic research design, you may refer to um, the links in the description box below. I'll be providing lectures on this topic soon. That's all for now. Bye bye.